Okay, I'm going to move the conversation now to the use of social media recently in Nigeria around the Occupy Nigeria movement. You were there during that period. Describe to me what was happening. How was social media being used in the context of that campaign?
I was there at the beginning, or just before the Occupy Nigeria, just before it coalesced into the actual movement, for want of a better word. Well, it was used as an organizing tool. It was used as a way to sort of focus, I guess, anger is probably the correct phrase to use, but it might be a little bit too extreme. Discontent, shall we say, to move from the particular issue of the removal of the fuel subsidy to more to discontent with governance.
With the whole government, yeah.
It was also a great way of spreading information, but I mean, interesting enough that its strength is also its biggest weakness, because what it did, it exposed the Occupy movement for not having a thought out fixed objective, which I think is an important lesson that should perhaps be taken on board. And also it was responsible for spreading an inordinate amount of disinformation and propaganda, and really things that were really not helpful.
And the campaign became very personal.
Well, the campaign didn't just become personal, it became personal and quite nasty, and very, very, very intolerant, which is very interesting. I'm sure that people will do deeper academic studies about the irony of such a movement being quite so intolerant to any dissent.
So you were saying that there was, in a way, there was no debate about what everybody was in fact protesting about.
There was zero debate. In fact, I don't think anybody really articulated very well what they were protesting about. I think that, if we're being fair, the different groups were protesting about different things, and in some cases individuals were protesting about different things masquerading as groups. This is one of the interesting things about social media, is that I can present myself as a group, as an individual, as several individuals, without very much need to verify it. I could open 20 Twitter accounts and tweet the same message, retweet it myself and follow myself and so on and so forth, and build up followers like that. And I think that happened quite a lot. I mean, it did.
Which rather begs the question, how many people are involved on Twitter and how many people are involved on... We know how many people are involved on Facebook, but how many people are tweeting in Nigeria?
Well, it also begs the question, is it a circular internal conversation?
Yes, in other words, the same people talking to themselves.
Exactly. So, and how useful is it to have a circular? Because, at some stage, if everyone is reinforcing the same message, then it just becomes an internal conversation, and it doesn't really have very much relevance. And I think that if you're listening to the same message from everyone else, there's no debate. It's a group and everyone's saying the same thing. Then you just become convinced naturally that the message that you're listening to is the only message that's out there, and that's a dangerous thing in any sort of political, social movement activity.
Particularly a democratic.
Well, it's particularly undemocratic.
Yes.
So, which is why it's particularly dangerous. I mean, that is a strange contradiction and conundrum about this, because I guess in North Africa, it was much more, focused on, they had an objective, if you would. The objective was to move from dictatorship to democracy. That was the objective. In Nigeria, that wasn't the objective. There was no objective. There was no clearly articulated objective. This is what we want to get to. This is what we'll know when we're there, when we've got this. No, it just became a protest movement for the sake of being a protest movement almost.
And does all this make you optimistic or pessimistic about the prospects for Nigeria?
Actually makes me optimistic, strangely enough, because I think the genie is out of the bottle. One thing I do have to say, and I mean I don't want to sound like a scab or like a sympathizer, but you know, the government stood back and let people protest for a week. Yeah, I think that we tend to focus on the negatives quite a lot, but that did happen. The young people of Nigeria came out onto the street to, defend their democracy. I mean, it might have been in a strange way. They might have been defending a subsidy on petrol, but you could argue the merits and demerits of another time. But they did come out to protest, to exercise their democratic rights, their rights as citizens, and it cut across all classes. And the interesting thing about the social media thing is to measure how much of a reflection it was of the protest and that sort of movement in its entirety across the classes, the demographics of the country, and how much it was a educated, middle class, young, I mean, I guess people call them the Twitterati in Nigeria, a young Twitterati sort of crowd of people, and that is an interesting debate, and that is something that will become apparent, much more apparent as we sort of move on. But now, I mean, what is it? Tony Blair said the kaleidoscope is in flux, I believe.
Yes. And what gives you cause for pessimism? Because you.
What gives me cause for pessimism is two things. One, how quickly it became tribalized. I mean, there was a quite marked, tribal undertones to the whole thing that sort of that came around. As the protests kind of moved forward. The second thing was just how intolerant it was. That caused me to be very, very pessimistic because, having the right to dissent is essentially what the protests, is about. It's actually dissenting, but then to say, that it was almost like having a thought police. You could not dissent on anything at all. You had to. Some people were like, well, I don't actually mind the removal of the subsidy, but we need governance. But they won't say that in public. They felt that they needed to say it in private. They felt they needed to say, oh well, we need petrol back 65 naira a litre. And so the intolerance definitely made me feel pessimistic. But hopefully, and the third thing that actually made me pessimistic was just this sheer amount of hysteria, rumor, innuendo, and there's a saying that the first casualty of war is truth, and in this case, it wasn't a war, but truth was definitely the first casualty.
Ayo, thanks for talking to me today.
Thank you.